crazy. Hey, Phil. Hey, Georgia. All right, let's see what we can do here. What's that? I have it on, yes. Packed house tonight. Hey, Jerry. Standing room only. We can put seats over here too if it's easier to see. There's like sporadic chairs if you're looking for seats. Hey guys. Gonna turn this a little bit. All right. If you come in and you're looking for seats, we got some over here. Anybody see the sign-in sheet going around? Is it being passed around? All right, so what that's for, guys, if you haven't been here before, we just want to get name, email, that kind of thing. Keep in contact. If you're not comfortable with giving us that information, that's also fine. By way of introduction, my name is Rich Jones. I'm the CEO here at FAVOR Greenville. I'll talk a little bit more about my story and what I'm up to and who I am as we go through. So family recovery group, when I'm here, which is about 3 Mondays a month. And so how that's going to work, unless I'm on vacation, I'll be in Anderson the first Monday of every month, and I'll broadcast a group from there. We've just opened a site in Anderson, and then I'll be in Spartanburg the first Tuesday of every month. The other 3 Mondays I'll be here. So if you're scheduling because you want to be here when I'm here, or or you're trying to stay away from me, you know when to come and all that kind of good stuff. So, you know, I have some topics tonight that I wanted to talk about, some things that I was going to go through. But again, as we always do, if we can just open the floor for a minute, if there are any specific issues that you guys have on your mind or any kind of crisis that you're dealing with or anything I can help you with right from the jump. Anybody got any specific questions that I can answer before I go into some of our overview? Anybody got anything? And that's fine. You can ask along the way. And we'll leave these cards and we'll leave these resources as we go through the evening tonight. If anything comes up, stop me and I can try to explain a little bit more. I know that depending on how long you've been acquainted with this issue or what you've dealt with in your family, you're going to be at different stages. A lot of folks, you're probably sitting there and you want real tangible answers and you want, what exactly do I do about this? What do I exactly do I do about that? And I'm going to try to help you with that tonight. But remember, we have to emphasize that this is a process. This really is a process. That one of the most misleading things about substance misuse and about substance use disorder is kind of the media story or the stereotype that we have that a person comes to what? They hit rock bottom. First of all, rock bottom doesn't exist, and it's a mythical kind of creation, but they hit rock bottom, and then what? They fly off to rehab. They have this magical experience from rehab, and they come back and they live happily ever after.
It's all magic.
It's all magic. Smoke and mirrors. And I got to tell you that I've been doing this for 20 years, and I've talked to 5,000, 7,000, 10,000 people, and I've never met anybody who that was their story. Every single person has gone through a process, and every single family that I've walked this journey with has gone through a process of understanding what they're dealing with, getting a little better about communicating on it, starting to set some boundaries, starting to take care of themselves, that kind of thing. The person themselves, it tends to unfortunately involve some missteps along the way. You make a mistake, you start over. You make a mistake, you start over. The facts are what we know. We were talking about this today in the all recovery meeting, that the odds of recovery defined by the federal government as 1 year continuous recovery, meaning you're in remission for 1 year, are about 75% if people stay engaged in recovery. Meaning whatever that is for them, seeing a therapist, coming to FAVOR meetings, going to AA meetings, going to SMART recovery meetings, whatever it is that they're into, if they keep doing it, about 75% will eventually get better. But the problem is 90% quit. So really what we have is we don't have an issue of like, how does it work or what do we do? We have an issue of how do we get people to follow through? That's Favor's biggest concern, and that's the code that we have to crack as a nation, and we are dedicated to figuring that out. And we think it'll involve technology, and we think it'll involve less. How about like the 1 hour session? Now understand when I'm saying this, I'm a therapist. It's what I do for a living. I'm a therapist. I have a private practice. At different times in my career, I've had a thriving so I've made my living off the 1 hour session. You guys know what I mean by that? Yeah. Tell me about your week. How's it going? Tell me about that. You know? Try to get you to get in touch with insight around that. And that works for a very, very small percentage of folks. It's certainly, I'm not sure it works for a person who's in active addiction or a person who's trying to figure this out. They're not even sure what happened 3 hours earlier. You get that? So to come in and talk to me 1 hour a week, that's probably not going to get it done. One of the reasons groups are so effective, one of the reasons we recommend groups, and if your loved one is kind of trying to figure out what direction to go, we recommend you start with groups. You start here, for example, with our groups at noon, is you have multiple opinions, you have multiple perspectives, and they tend to catch people's attention and capture people's attention more. They're more entertaining, I don't know how else to say it. And sometimes they're really entertaining. And people tend to get a lot out of that experience. That's why we recommend groups as part of the process. But whatever the person's doing, if they keep doing it, they tend to get better. Real quick, this is who I am professionally. I've spent the majority of my career working in clinical settings, running inpatient rehabs, outpatient clinics. I spent a lot of time in community mental health, and I was thinking about that today, just how different the approach was in community mental health as opposed to addiction treatment when I went and kind of got involved in traditional addiction treatment services. My first 5 years in the field, I had switched from my undergraduate degrees in business management. My first 5 years in the field, I didn't spend any time in an office. Everything was delivered in the community. People's homes, coffee shops, YMCAs, homeless shelters, that kind of thing. And to me, that's where we need to return as a country. That's where we need to go with addiction. We need to get to this point where we're finding people and connecting to people. Because, again, going back to the point that most of the folks won't engage in this. So I've been here at FAVOR Greenville for about 6 years. This is my 6th year. And we got a lot going on. All right, so let's talk first about what are the options. We've gone through this. Remember, we had 4. I've added 1. We now have 5. We've upgraded. This is the 2019 edition, version 2.0. So here are your options. And the reason why we say this, a lot of times folks will call and say, what do I do? I think we talked about this last week. A lot of times the question is, here's what's going on with George. And it's a description of maybe drinking too much and getting in some trouble and maybe having issues at work and got a DUI. Here's what's going on with George. And then the question is, what do I do? And so I'm going to tell you the details for your unique situation. It'll vary among people, but in general, you have 5 options the way I see it. And we can talk this over if I'm missing something. You could do absolutely nothing other than what you were doing before you called us or before you came to this group. You don't have to change anything. We get that. We understand that. We respect that. There's nothing easy about setting limits and setting boundaries. It's one of those things that's easier said than done. It's especially if the person's younger, you get full of fear, that kind of thing. So you don't have to change anything. The pros with that, you're not taking any chances. It's not nearly as emotionally intense. The cons are obvious. It could get worse. Maybe you're not even sure what the person's doing. Maybe this is a dangerous period of time and you need to do something. So that's one option. You could do nothing. The second option is what I added. So this would be try to get connected or stay connected at a relatively high level and avoid the enabling behaviors. And I know that sounds like a mouthful. But a lot of times people think it's one or the other. Like I can step back and detach from the person and really like not have a lot to do with them, or I'm going to get engaged in like enabling and I'm going to get engaged in rescuing. You guys get that? There's polar opposites. What we would argue is there's something in the middle. where you can stay connected, but you don't have to rescue the person, okay? And you can try to nudge them along and just work the relationship, work the love, if you will, to try to move them toward recovery. Sometimes that works, guys. There have been many, many times whenever a family member has said to another family member, you know, I'm worried about you, I love you, can we go out to lunch and just talk about this? And they've gone out to lunch and things start to move along. This is a little different than what you've heard. You've heard things like step back, detach. My buddy, the guy who said, don't even give him a peanut butter jelly sandwich. Have I ever shared that story in here?
No.
So a common phrase in the drug and alcohol treatment world is, cut them off, you're enabling them to death, cut them off, don't even give them a peanut butter jelly sandwich as a guideline for parents. Well, first of all, who the hell really wants a peanut butter and jelly sandwich? It could at least be like fried bologna. That's a Pittsburgh thing, just so you know. So
Can you do a screen fit on that? It's a little,
I don't even know what is a screen fit.
just make it slightly smaller because a lot of the words are cut off.
I'll see. Now look what you made me do. My computer just went berserk. All right, I'm not going to. I'm afraid to touch it. I'll read through these, guys. So that's you got column 1, you got column 2. All right. And again, the cons related to just trying to nudge the person is it might require more of a sense of urgency. Do you guys get that? It might be we really don't have time to nudge the person along. The best example of column 2 was my friend in Pennsylvania whose son, he was dealing with a lot of different stuff. He was younger, like early 20s. And I remember I was doing therapy with the kid. And I remember the kid saying, I just want my dad to talk to me about the weather. Everything had to do with recovery. Does that make sense? Everything had to do with you have a problem. Everything had to do with you're going to die. And what we found worked was we changed the strategy to just working on a relationship instead of constantly trying to twist the person into the recovery process. The movie Beautiful Boy, has anyone seen it yet? Well, so I don't know if I recommend that you see it if you're in the middle of this, guys. I don't know that you should go see this if you're dealing with this actively. You want to be in a stable place because it's an intense, incredibly accurate depiction of what goes on. But there's a scene, and it's actually part of the trailer, where Steve Carroll, who plays the father, is talking to his son, and he's doing that thing that I was just describing. He's trying to figure it out. And you may have gone through that as a parent. You're trying to figure out, why are you doing this? Why do you keep drinking? Why do you keep using? Why do you keep destroying yourself? And the kid is the actor in that movie is incredible, the boy. He's so accurate in the way he reacts to that situation. He can't even explain to his dad what's going on. You can see like the frustration and the overwhelming anxiety in the kid's face, and he's just like, he lashes out at that point. And they leave the restaurant. The dad is just completely exacerbated, just totally frustrated. That is a hard thing for parents to do, though, right? To step back and be. It's easy for me as a therapist, but it's hard as a parent. But it is an option. Yes, ma'am.
Can I share it, since you mentioned a movie, on HBO over the weekend, the movie Traffic was on, it starred Michael Douglas. Same thing, it's a story of
The drug czar's daughter is addicted.
And it is so hard to
Yeah.
watch, but it is a wonderful story the way it ends. It portrays similar to what you just, if you haven't seen it,
Yeah.
it's on HBO right now.
You got to be real careful where you're at when you watch any of these movies. If you're a person in recovery, or if you're a person who loves somebody in recovery, it's not good from an emotional standpoint to go there if your loved one's not doing well, or if you're not emotionally doing well, because some of them are pretty accurate in what they're dealing with. I'm familiar with Traffic. It's a very hard movie. So that's column 2, right? All right. The third column is plan an intervention meeting, but it's not really an intervention because you're not going to put out the bottom lines. The reason, what's the difference between a meeting and an intervention? Not much, other than an intervention comes with an ultimatum. You get that? But about 60% of the time, when families kind of get together, and they get together all the players, mom, dad, stepmom, stepdad, brother, sister, boyfriend, girlfriend, and you get them all in a room, just a conversation, believe it or not, about 60% of the time will get the person moving toward recovery. Get them to engage. Now, it doesn't work all the time, and sometimes you have to bring a professional in and you have to crank it up, and that's the other column, that's an intervention. We are going to roll out a whole nother arm of services here at FAVOR Greenville that do interventions. We have not been able to successfully implement interventions here in our program. And the reason is we do them for free. And the reason that doesn't work, guys, is you cannot do an intervention unless you're 100% sure you want to do it. And you got to have, and the supervision and the advice I got is, even if it's on a sliding scale and it's a small fee, you got to have some skin in the game. Because an intervention is what? You guys have seen interventions before. How many people have participated in an intervention? How many people have had one done to them? You know, they're intense, man. They're staff intensive, and the process is, it's not like a meeting where you're just having a meeting and Jerry and I are talking and we're talking about what's going on, and then it ends and we're like, okay, we'll be back here again next week and try again next week. An intervention ends with the family member. They have to say, here are my bottom lines. You can no longer live in this house if you're going to continue to do that. Can you see how that's like next level stuff? And can you see when we were doing these for free, literally, I would do all the prep work with the family and people would back out and just not show up that day. And I don't judge them for not showing up, but you can't do that. You cannot do that to us. You know, we are stretched, and so we have to have a commitment in that regard. But an intervention is an option. Intervention requires more than 2 people. Let's just talk through an intervention, all right? Just kind of talk our way through it. Ask me some questions along the way. So it requires more than 2 people. So at least 3 people, and you don't want to go above 12. That, I mean, I've had it happen where it was like a seminar. It's like all of these people and that guy's getting the intervention done on them. You know, you want to go up to about 12 at the most, and you know, ideally what, like 8, 6 to 8, that kind of thing. But you could do it with 3 if you had to. And whoever is going to be involved in the intervention, they don't have to. I don't want to say this. They don't have to 100% agree on what the outcome should be. In other words, we believe that Rich should go to rehab. We believe Rich should start back in his meetings. They don't have to agree on that, but in the room they have to agree on it. So you have to do some legwork up front, and people will say things like, well, what if the person's drinking themselves, or what if they have a drug problem themselves? That's not nearly as important as, are they going to be able to present the company line to the person when you get in a room with them? And why is that? For obvious reasons. You can't have like cracks in the armor when you actually go in there to have this conversation. So how do you do that? We help you figure that out, but in a nutshell, basically you start calling people and you start trying to figure out who else could be on your team. Usually one person starts with us. We call that person the point person. I don't know why this is the case. It's usually mom. Is that surprising to anybody? It is. It just usually is mom that calls, and so she starts calling Uncle Joe, and then she calls and makes sure Dad's on the same page, and then she calls Uncle Fred, and you know, and the girlfriend, and we get all here, and there's 6 of us, and we take one day here at the office where we go through things and we talk it through. So, you know, here's what you're going to do, and this is what you're not going to do, and then the next day we get the person to come in, and this is where people are always surprised. We don't surprise people with interventions. We invite people to interventions. And people usually say, and we say like, we're having an intervention, we want you to come. And people always say, well, they'll never come. I've never had anybody not come. The last thing they're going to do is allow you to sit in a room and talk about them without them there to defend themselves. They will come to the meeting. They are not down with the idea that all 6 or 7 of you are in a room talking about them without them here to explain how it's not as bad as you think it is. And then they come in, and then we do the meeting, and really honestly the meeting itself is probably 25% to 50% of the process. The real issue is what happens after the meeting, especially if the person refuses to go, right? Because then you have to follow through on whatever you said at that meeting. And that's why we need serious commitments from folks. It just will not ever work if you say, you cannot live in my basement unless you get some help, and then they don't get any help and they're living in their basement, 6 months later. Do you see how it's worse? It's better to not do anything at all than to do an intervention and say that and not be able to follow through. But that is an option. You can put that process together. Right now, if you called the crisis line tonight and asked, we would refer you out. If you called the crisis line and you were saying, Rich said we could do an intervention, they would probably call me and I'd have to help them find somebody. There aren't a lot of interventionists around. So we're going to roll out a whole entire team to get that done. And then the fifth thing that you can do is you can detach in the classic sense. I don't know if anybody's ever heard that term. Detach means, you're not going to kick them out of the house. You're not going to go out to lunch with them. And you're not going to go out of your way to build a relationship. You're simply going to try to remove yourself from the emotional baggage of the situation. This is classic Al-Anon coaching at that point. Pretty hard to do, right? Especially parent to child. We have got to acknowledge the difference between spouses. When my wife was dealing with me, I'm not sure if you call it detachment or plotting my murder. There's a fine line between the two. It was so much easier for her to step back from that than it was when we went through some stuff with my daughter. You get that? So much. You cannot divorce your kids, so to speak. So you really have to be honest with yourself on your ability to pull this off as well. This means things like they call you in the middle of the night, they need a ride home, it's 2 o'clock in the morning, it's cold. Now, cold is a relative term, right? Depending on where you are. Like, cold here is warm. But it's cold, and they want you to come get them because they were at a party and they were kind of, stranded or something like that. And you've been talking to them about this, and you have to decide in those moments whether or not you go get them. Detachment, though, really in its purest form is you do your thing. I'm not going to judge you. I'm not going to try to stop you, but don't expect me to bail you out. Don't expect me to make it easier. You get that? So again, people detach when they get tired. Can you guys relate to that? You know what I mean by tired? Emotionally worn out from the situation. You've been going through this over and over again. This is the 15th time they've gone to rehab. This is we've been told it's not going to happen again way too many times. I'm done. That's usually when people detach. If you feel like you're getting there, if you feel like you're getting worn out like that, you have to honor that, guys. You know that you're allowed to step back from this situation. You are not a bad parent if you detach. You are not a bad parent if you step back and say, I just cannot do this anymore. I mean, understand, it'll take you out too, right? We've talked about this before. Stress-related conditions. You name a chronic disease or a chronic illness that stress doesn't negatively impact. I don't know if there is one. Depression, anxiety, all of the above. You're allowed to step back and really say, like, I love you, but I cannot be part of this anymore.
Say that again.
I love you, but I cannot be part of this anymore. I love you too much to watch you self-destruct. This is killing me. I love you too much to take these calls in the middle of the night like this. The problem is people get a lot of bad advice in this column because this is where the term tough love gets thrown around. And I don't believe in tough love at all. I believe in the appropriate expression of love. And sometimes the appropriate expression of love involves setting boundaries and not rescuing people. And it involves saying no. I've said this millions of times, but if I go home tonight and my 6-year-old wants to drive my car, the appropriate expression of love is, no, Aiden, you're not allowed to do that. If your 38-year-old calls in the middle of the night and is in jail and wants you to bail him out, the appropriate expression of love could be, no, I'm not coming to do that. But it doesn't have to be mean. It doesn't have to be tough. Do you get that? It already feels crappy. And if you do things and you say things like, I love you too much to just watch you self-destruct, and I love you too much, I love you so much, it's breaking my heart, and I can't take these phone calls anymore, that actually has an impact on people. I have sat in the sessions and I've seen that go down. I actually saw a mom totally like break her son by saying, like it had been contentious for a lot of years. Do you follow what I'm saying? Just like an argument every day, a fight every day, fear-based, anger. And we coached her into saying that I love you so much, it's breaking my heart. I cannot deal with this. I can't even sleep. I just literally can't see you anymore because it's killing me. And I don't know how to explain it. Her son just freaking broke down. Like he popped. And we were able to get him into a facility and we were able to get him moving ahead. And that doesn't always go down that way, but it's a real heartfelt, legitimate thing to say. Your son or daughter, husband or wife, still is not a bad person. I'm going to go over this in a minute. I'm going to talk about what addiction is. And can still be reached through emotional leverage. Do you guys get that? Most of the time. I shouldn't say all the time. Sometimes if it goes on too long, perhaps they become so hardened to the situation where they can't be moved. But for the most part, they're going to hear you when you start talking like that. They are not going to hear you when. They're not going to hear you when you start yelling. They're not going to hear you when you start threatening. Remember, I've given you the playbook on that. That's what we want. We want you to yell, we want you to threaten, we want to argue, we want to fight, because that creates distraction, it creates noise, it creates cover for our behavior. We do not want to be like in an emotional conversation whenever we're dealing with this. Can I say a couple other things about that though? You have to remember that there are situations where people do have personality disorders. There is such a thing as narcissistic personality disorder, and there is such a thing as like sociopathic behaviors. It's only about 6% of the general population. It's about 18% of people who are addicted, but it's still not the majority of people that are addicted. You get that? So we also have to acknowledge that in your particular situation, you may be dealing with somebody who has a personality disorder and cannot be reached through emotion. By definition, personality disorders, you do not feel remorse. You do not experience emotions. So, and then also some other circumstances around mood disorders and behavioral disorders, right? There are different types of acting out issues. So I'm painting with a broad brush, but I don't want you to think that you have to take your individual circumstances into account. Is everyone clear on that? Do not like just take what I say as 100% gospel truth. Take what I say as basic information and then ask yourself some questions about your particular situation and individualize it to what you're dealing with. Because I don't know enough about what everyone has going on to make those type of statements. Does anyone have any questions about these options? Or anything that I can clarify? Anyone?
Maybe just to clarify that you can kind of go back and forth.
Yeah, you can go back and forth. Actually, what you got to do is you got to declare one and you got to stay in it until I give you permission to leave it. That's a joke. People don't even know what they want to pick, if you want to be honest. People don't know what they want to pick. And people probably come to this group for a while before they make decisions and stuff. Here's the 100% honest to God truth, 100% transparency. We need you to know clearly where you're at any given time, because the staff, okay, we will listen to you. We will allow you to vent. We will allow you to say, you could say the same thing over and over to us, but we want to know that all we're doing is listening. Because when folks ask us, what do we do, what do we do, what do we do, guys, there is no other answer. Do you follow me? Like, I swear, as true as I'm standing up here, if there was a secret formula, I would get it out, and I would go get it. But today we were talking about, pulling out the black van and driving around Greenville and just kidnapping people and making them go to treatment and stuff. I can't believe I just said that on live TV. There are basic things that can go on, and so we will support you wherever you're at. But if you're in this column, for example, the best we can do is just listen. You guys get that? So when somebody asks me 10 times, what do I do? I don't have a different answer the 11th time. What I do have, though, is a sympathetic ear. And sometimes that's all you need, right? Because we also know that human beings feel better when they talk about things out loud. We just want to all be clear on how we're working forward with this. All right. Any other thoughts or questions on this process? All right. This is just the symptoms and the criteria around addiction. We do this every week. We're trying to turn you into your own experts in this area. Not because we want you to go around and diagnose your friends or anything like that, but basically we want you to be aware that there's not everybody who parties winds up addicted. Actually, the majority of people who party don't wind up addicted. You get that? How about this? 46% of people who find recovery figured out on their own. So we have to understand that there's a wide variety of experiences in this process. These are just guidelines. Tolerance of withdrawal are physical symptoms. Tolerance takes more and more of the substance to get the same effect. Withdrawal, when you don't have the substance in your body, you're sick. When you put it in your body, it goes away. So like opioids, for example. Craving and preoccupation is an internal process. You think about it all the time. You think about it all day. Can't control. You went out, you were going to have a couple drinks, but you stayed out all night. You intended to go home after happy hour. You stayed out all night. You just couldn't control your own behavior. Can't cut back. I'm only going to drink on the weekends, but I can't stick to that. I want to drink it on Monday night because it's Monday Night Football. Then Wednesday, it's halfway through the week. I got all these reasons to stretch it. Interpersonal issues. People are upset. People are angry. I'm fighting with people about my substance use. Avoid non-using activities. I only want to go to the party. I don't want to go to my niece's birthday party where they're not serving alcohol. Work and school problems. You're late for work. Maybe you get fired. Maybe you're flunking out of school. Great deal of time spent on using. It's a full-time job. And then using in physically hazardous situations. The best example is drinking and driving. Here's another example of the last criteria. In today's world, if you're using street pills or you're using heroin, or you can make an argument methamphetamine now too, you're using in a physically hazardous situation, right? Because of fentanyl and carfentanil. So that you check the box right away depending on the substance that the person's using. And if you get 6 out of those 11, you meet criteria for substance use disorder severe. That's as close as we can get to an x-ray, guys. And this is why it's so hard for people to cop to this disease. It's not like when you go to the doctor and you have a broken leg and he shows you the x-ray and he's like, look, you got to stay off your leg, man. You got a broken leg here. It's not like that. People explain these things away. People explain these things away even though in some creative ways. Or they just straight deny that that's the reality of the situation. Have you ever felt like you were talking to your loved one about what was going on and literally you were like in a parallel universe or something? Am I not seeing what I think I'm seeing? Am I losing my mind? Have you ever felt that way? Am I going out of my mind because they convince you that the reality of the situation isn't necessarily it isn't real, it's your interpretation of it. Have any of you been told that you need help by your loved one? You're crazy. You're crazy. There's something wrong with you. You need help. That's all part of it's literally classic Freudian defense mechanism type stuff to keep them from recognizing what's going on. And what's interesting when you talk to families, the person is very, very convincing. And many times you'll find that the family member actually does start questioning themselves. Maybe she wasn't drinking. Maybe he wasn't drinking. Maybe he didn't take that money. You literally start second guessing your own reality. And that's tough. That was one of the things whenever I got into recovery. So I've jokingly said that I was certain that my wife was going to kill me in my sleep whenever I entered into recovery. Things got worse. And the reason was because she realized that all those times that she thought were I was using and this and that was going on, and I convinced her that she was insane, right? I convinced her that she didn't see what she thought she saw. When she realized when I got in recovery I was right, it made her so angry to be deceived like that. But remember, guys, let's go to this picture real quick. Let's go to, here we go. This is the condition of my brain at the time of the deceiving, of the great deception. I'm not thinking clearly. I am not of sound mind. I'm not making excuses for my behavior then. I have complete responsibility for what went on. But this is a healthy brain. This is the neurotransmitter dopamine. This is a compromised or an addicted or chronic substance use. Remember, we talked about, I think we've talked in here, how there really truly is no such thing as chemicals in the brain. Have we talked about this? You've heard the term chemical imbalance. That's actually not true. There aren't actually chemicals. We don't have liquids in our head. It's neurotransmitters between cells. It's electronic impulses between cells. And what you can do is you can identify different electronic impulses, and so you can track different neurotransmitters. Other ones, guys, things like norepinephrine. How about serotonin? We've heard of serotonin, that kind of thing. In this case, this is dopamine. Dopamine allows you to feel pleasure. It allows you to feel contentment. From an evolutionary point of view, dopamine was very important. Because when you ate food, dopamine was released. That was a pleasurable experience. What did it do? I better come back here and do this again tomorrow. For reproduction, sexual experiences, dopamine is released. It's a positive experience. I better come back here again and do this tomorrow. Here's where it gets really interesting. Even in terms of bonding together, dopamine is released because there's safety in numbers. So everything about dopamine was positive, or it is positive. It reinforces safety, security, and literally the survival of the species. The problem is when you take a substance, when you take a psychoactive substance and you put it in your body, you release an unusual amount of dopamine. That's where the euphoria comes from. That's why it doesn't, some people say that food is addictive, but eating a piece of chocolate cake doesn't feel like taking a Loratab, to me. Do you follow what I'm saying? It's a different experience. And if you've ever drank and all that kind of stuff, and you guys are allowed to drink, this is a family group, have at it. That was sort of a joke. So you get that feeling, that warm and fuzzy feeling. That's because the amount of dopamine that was released is an extraordinary amount. Now, if you do it over and over and over and over again, what will happen over time, and this takes a while, is the brain will shut off the production of dopamine. It'll literally turn it off. Analogous to if you go home tonight and your toilet's running and the water's overflowing, you're going to reach down and you're going to turn that knob and you're going to shut off the water. So the brain shuts off the water. It shuts off the dopamine production because it's dysregulated and it's dangerous and this isn't normal and it can't re-regulate and it shuts off in some people, not everybody. Then you're walking around and you cannot experience normal contentment in any kind of way. It's not depression. It's hard to explain what this psychological state is like. Depression is different. Depression, involves active thoughts of hopelessness. It involves, being in bed all day. It involves thoughts of suicide. That is not what's going on when you're here. It literally is, I just don't feel right. So, if this is baseline, you're down here all day. And you got there from what? Putting substances in your body over and over again. So you compulsively go seek substances to try to fix this. And you pour it into an empty bucket. And that's what addiction is. And that's why they say the things that they say. And they do well for a while and fall off. And then they lie to you and all that other stuff. It's not because of a conscious decision. Do you get that? And that's why arguing and trying to debate won't ever get it done in a circumstance like this. You really won't ever talk your loved one out of anything. Any questions about that part of the process? Yes, ma'am.
So is that why, I've heard a couple of times, I just want to feel normal.
Yeah, you'll hear people talk about that quite a bit. It went from a party to I wanted to feel normal. And that can happen with every single substance. That can happen with alcohol. That can happen with opioids. It can happen, believe it or not, it can happen with marijuana. It can happen with any substance. You can get to the point where basically the payoff isn't there anymore. That's a telltale sign that something's up, right? That's one of the things that people also can recognize, and it helps get them motivated when they start to realize that. Yes, sir?
I just wanted to ask about the comment you made on meth and the risks. Is there a new hazard out there on that?
So his question was, what about methamphetamine? So fentanyl is being put into methamphetamine now too. So the deal is from a there's a fascinating book, and I don't know why anybody would ever, like, if you buy it and you want to read it, don't leave it on your coffee table. It's called Narconomics: How to Run a Drug Cartel. And it talks about product development from a cartel standpoint. And so, literally, so for example, one of the things that fueled the opioid epidemic was the legalization of marijuana. What happened was, when marijuana became legal, the cartel lost some of their product, some of their market, because there were now legal and so we have to create new customers. So let's create more addictive things, and let's try different things. And the idea, or the theory is that's now going on again with methamphetamine. It's definitely happening with methamphetamine and cocaine. And the reason is like, well, they're going to push down on opioids because everybody knows that prescription drugs are going to get shut off, which is not the right way to do this. We'll go on the record and say that. FAVOR Greenville does not recommend the across-the-board denials of prescriptions, not at all. First of all, there are people who are in legitimate pain. And secondly, that's going to create a lot of people going to the street to get that taken care of. So they're putting it in other stuff now. Yes?
What does fentanyl do? Doesn't it offset what the crystal meth does?
No, it's always been attractive in terms of like both a upper and a downer. There was speedballs, that kind of thing. There have always been people who mixed heroin and cocaine together and stuff like that. It's not unusual. The deal is that the addictive nature, there's two factors. The addictive nature of fentanyl is one, but also how far you can stretch your product. And basically, if the person got high, the person's going to be okay with it. If it was a different type of high than they wanted, but hey, they're still high, right? It's that kind of thing. No one's trying to kill, they're not trying to kill their customers. People say that all the time. Why would they want to kill their customers? That's not the case at all. They literally say it's the cost of doing business. Yeah, some people are going to die. So now understand something. The majority of people out there using guys aren't going to die. Do we get that? I don't want to be alarmist about this. I do want to be urgent about it, but there's great hope. We can get through this, especially if we start to be more sensible about it. But from a family standpoint, the takeaway is you're not dealing, like somebody has sucked the brain of your loved one out and put another brain in there when they're actively using, right? The good news is once they stop, this gets better. This gets better. Why does it happen? Main predictor is what? Age of first use, without question. How old you were when you first started doing this stuff. The other factors are genetic factors, and then the specific drugs you're using, co-occurring disorders, that kind of stuff. All right. So any questions about addiction, what it is, substance use, any questions about how to talk to your loved one if you're dealing with this, how to like bring it up? Anybody have any specific issues on this part of the equation, on the facts around this? Anybody? Because we're going to move into a whole other area. All right. Yes. You're like the kid in class who like everybody's getting ready to leave and then the kid's like, hey. Go ahead.
I guess just with the seriousness of fentanyl, I cannot understand somebody who has been through it, OD, paramedics came, talked to you in the hospital, I'm going to do better, wife having a second baby, blah, blah, blah. Knowing it's out there and then just...
So the part of your brain that allows you to say everything you just said is called the frontal cortex, and it's literally abstract thinking. Okay? It's reasoning, pros and cons. The train of thought that you just generated is because you were able to use that part of your brain. When you're addicted, that part of your brain is 100% offline. You get that?
They can't think like you and I. It just can't.
So if I...
But if they won't go to rehab, they won't do groups, they won't turn over their paycheck to help pay family expenses, I mean...
You go back to that first thing and you start asking yourself, where are we at?
Get a coach.
Wait, hold up. So, do you get that?
I do, but I guess it's my daughter
So it's a really good question. And
Just like when you said that you had a wreck when your kids were in the car. I mean, I just think at some point, a spouse, a family member, a parent, when you're putting other people in danger, there have to be some boundaries.
there have to be some boundaries. And so in your case, the problem, and it's not a problem, you're here, it's really good you're here. The issue or the strategy would be to get your daughter involved in something so she could start to reevaluate it. Remember, I had a graphic that had like a target, and it was sort of like who needs to be involved. And the problem that you're going to run into is that you're going to get like very strong opinions and very strong ideas, but if she doesn't start to get these ideas, you're probably fighting an uphill battle. Unless there's anyone else that you can get involved to help you out.
His parents basically gave up on him after a series of things in high school. They're around, but they paid a bunch to buy him off legally, and so it's kind of like,
Yeah, so you start to ask yourself exactly what can you do as an individual person to push that along.
I guess we just need to get a coach for her. I mean, she's just very non-confrontational.
Try to get her. Has she ever come to anything like this?
No, she will, but she's like 6 weeks from giving birth,
So,
she goes to work.
We have nurses in here that can deliver the baby if that happens. So one of the ideas, but a suggestion would be, and she might not be able to do it right now, I get that, but like in general, anybody can apply this. A suggestion would be to call this an educational workshop. One of the things is people are very, very intimidated and they don't really like the idea of going to group therapy. But if you say you have to come with me to check out this educational workshop, and then you've been here a bunch of times. Every single time they're going to see that this is going to I'm going to go over this, and if you're here with her, you can set it up with a question afterward. And now that you guys are all in on the take, you guys can weigh in too. So
About her, I guess it just amazes me, even if you stop for a little while, somehow you don't process, okay, I was lucky this time, but if I go back to it, I mean, the odds are not with you.
So how old is the person?
26.
Yeah. Here's what we know about this. It takes about 6 or 7 tries before somebody gets it. It's no different than the diabetic who just got his foot cut off and is eating Twinkies when he gets home that night. It's no different than any of y'all in here who have been told to change something about your behavior, and you have. So I don't really believe in the idea that addicts are uniquely problematic. I believe it's universal to all human beings. Do you guys get that? I mean, I'm very serious about that. We have a very specific issue that brings a lot of attention to us because we do a lot of rotten stuff when we're in the middle of it. But look, man, if any of you guys in here have it figured out, don't raise your hand, but how many of you have known the right thing to do and done the wrong thing anyway? And I can do a background check if I need to. So, now, that does not make it an excuse. And it also doesn't mean that you don't want to, raise hell about it and start saying, we're doing something about this. In your case, it would be with your daughter. Now, that age group thing, right? 20-somethings, right? Very hard in general to kind of wrangle 20-somethings. So, but if you started with her or anyone else, right now you're fighting a battle by yourself. And you're on an island, and that's not comfortable. Do you guys understand that part? That's also, if you can start to work on that, typically what we find is there's usually one person who kind of is shouldering all the weight in a situation like this when it first starts. You want to try to spread that out as much as possible and see if anyone else can get involved and help you out. Again, because this will burn you out, and if you get more than one person, they might be able to say you're crazy, but they might not be able to say he's crazy. You guys get that? You get divergent views. Good questions, though. Good stuff. All right, so let's talk about how to deal. And we're going to talk about a couple different things. We're going to talk about stress, and we're going to talk about worry. So now, even if you're not dealing with substance use, and even if you're, in stable recovery, or your loved one's in stable recovery, because some of you guys have been coming for a while, worry and stress is just a natural part of the human condition. Let's talk about some techniques and some things to get through this. I'm going to go through mine. Hopefully you'll weigh in. So everyone understand what worry is? I know it's kind of a stupid question, but so worry is an absolutely naturally occurring process. It prepares you for danger. It prepares you for a problem. It's a good thing. Chronic worry is it never shuts off. And sometimes it moves into this thing called generalized anxiety disorder. It can affect your sleep. It can affect your literally your gastrointestinal system, all this type of stuff. How many people can relate to chronic worry? I'm sure a lot of people in here can. Chronic worry is so much different than worry. Worry makes sense. The car's making a strange noise. I'm worried whether or not I'm going to be able to make it back to Pennsylvania. But obsessing about it all the time and allowing that to move to what? Oh my gosh, we're going to have to get it fixed and it's going to be financial ruin. And then what? I'm going to be living in a van down by the river, right? With my 7 kids. We're going to be eating SpaghettiOs and ramen noodles. Do they have ramen noodles, right? Everyone knows what that is. All right. So what we're trying to talk about is not getting rid of worry, because worry is healthy. We're trying to talk about how do you turn that hamster wheel off. And I'm going to talk about some things that contribute to it and some things that you can do to work on it. So one of the interesting things, now I have a Facebook logo up here, and it doesn't have to be about Facebook. So you got real tangible things to worry about. You got real things that you're dealing with in your life if you're dealing with substance use. You know, how are things going to turn out for her and the baby? How are things going to turn out for him if he ever gets back in college? Oh my gosh, I don't even know where she is tonight, right? That is real tangible worries. So think about that bringing you up to a 7. You want to minimize all the other emotional stress and all the other emotional issues that are not that important right now. And one of them is comparison of your situation to the rest of the world. And what I mean specifically is that family has their act together so much. Look what's happening. He just went to Harvard and graduated. He was co-captain of the Chinese checkers team, and is going to be an ambassador to Russia. That's a weird kind of train of thought that I just threw out there. But what are we? Then you start worrying about stuff that you really don't need to worry about now. Like what? Am I a good enough mom? Am I a good enough dad? Where did we go wrong? So it's not that you're trying not to worry about legit things. You're trying to not get into the comparison. And I put Facebook up because it's just such a great example. We know. I don't know if you all know. I'm about to tell you something. The images that people put on Facebook aren't necessarily 100% real. They're sort of dressed up a little bit, right? They're kind of like they're not necessarily showing all the things that are going on. Yes.
And they're there forever.
And they're there forever. Yep, and they're there forever. And they're so we can all be reminded if we want to about how crappy we are as parents.
And no pictures of warts on Facebook.
That's right. That's right. It's all the good stuff, you know. And it's we could all be reminded about how we fell short when you're, and that's part of the human nature. We will do that, but it's really not healthy when you're in the middle of dealing with a crisis. Think about it as you have all your emotional reserves, or you have you kind of have any muscle. You have to exercise it, and if you do it too much, you're going to get tired. It's the same thing with managing stress, managing worry. This is a time to put a lot of that on. I believe it's always a good time to put that stuff on the side. But be careful that you don't get into that. And I use Facebook, but the comparison can come from anywhere. Every single person walking this earth is dealing with significant crosses in their life. Do you guys understand that? One of the advantages of being a therapist is you actually know the reality of what's going on with all kinds of different folks from all kinds of different walks of life. Yes?
We have to quit watching the news, too. Oh, yeah.
I have that in here. I have about be careful about what you let into your environment. I have that in. There's another one. But don't compare yourself to other people, other families, that kind of thing. Now, we've talked about this in here. We got to be careful because sometimes worst case scenario thinking gets people to a very fatalistic place. but there's a lot of literature and a lot of work that's been done around this idea of, I'm going to stare this thing in the eye and I'm just going to look right at it and I'm going to say, like, I can get through this. I can get through the unthinkable. And I shared about what went on with my son, my 6-year-old. He was 5 at the time when he wound up being intubated, and he was in a drug-induced coma for like 4 or 5 days. And, you know, I felt like he was safe, but there was a reality to that situation that could take you to a real dark place. And sometimes if you're able to kind of like look at that and kind of like say, yeah, there it is, it's horrible, you can move through it. Does that make sense? You got to be careful with this. It's best if you're going to talk about it, you talk about it with somebody who's really, really safe, somebody who can help you through that. You know, what the worst case scenario is varies from situation to situation. A lot of people automatically think my son or daughter is going to die. The truth is, statistically speaking, that's not the likely outcome of this situation. Do you guys get that? That's not likely from a statistical standpoint. But it can get ugly in other ways too, right? Frequent hospital trips, just how are they going to wind up? How are they going to take care of themselves? All that type of thinking. Can you get in touch with it and say, I will live through that? I will live through that. Any comments on number 2? Typically there isn't. I'm thinking about taking that one out. It's such a bummer. Yeah.
Just seeing that here one night and driving home and thinking it through helped me to, okay, so I can start setting this boundary, because if that happens, I've already figured out I can make it through that.
Yeah. Well, I think the other thing about this is this also has to do with some of the existential things that we deal with in life, and some of the really like big deal stuff. Why is there suffering in the world? Why am I going through this? What happens when we die type stuff. This is like where a lot of people turn to their faith for answers. This is where a lot of people turn to like a more like intense prayer life if they're dealing with this. How do you make sense of this possibility? Especially if it's just killing you right now. Do you understand what I'm saying? Like, especially if it's just eating you up inside and you're laying down at night and you find yourself staring at the ceiling because you can't go to sleep. Maybe then it's better to go right at it than try to run from it. That would be the idea of this. And any other comments on this process? Number 3, this has been proven to work as well. Set aside time to worry. Trick your brain. Tell you I'm going to write, and usually it's done in a journal. I didn't bring my journal. I'm going to write every day from 6:30 to 6:45 every day about everything I worry about. And then through the course of the day, literally you're telling yourself, I'll get to that at 6:30. I'll get to that at 6:30. I'll get to that. This has proven to work. If you do this 7 days in a row, they've done studies where overall anxiety levels drop. You have to do it at the same time for the same amount of time, preferably with the same pencil and same notebook. Literally what you're doing is you're creating like a neural pathway around this. Try it. Who's going to try this? Try this. Come back here next week and tell us. Well, first you have to figure out where your level of worry is beforehand, which isn't fair because I just said this out loud to you, so I've kind of ruined the experiment. But see if you feel better. It's the other thing. So none of this is going to work unless you do it. You know, I'm obsessed with planners. You guys know what planners are? Well, they were for a while paper day planners, and I would buy them obsessively. Now they are apps. They're all apps. Because I kept trying to buy a planner that was going to actually do all my work for me. I'm not joking. I kept thinking I was going to come up with one that had such a wonderful system that I actually didn't have to do anything. And everything would be organized, and I would be less stressed out. It turns out you actually have to do things if you want to feel better. And that's also another difficult part of this conversation. Because again, a lot of people come to this particular group not because they want to do things to get better. Why do they come to this group?
To fix the addict.
Well, they want me to tell them how to fix the drug addict or the alcoholic. They want me to, in a preferred, just take care of it. That's the preferred answer. And And the problem is we're not a rehab, guys. We don't do that. And rehabs don't do it either. The difference is we're not going to take $30,000 for a month. Okay? No one can fix them. No one can fix them. The best we can do is help people get into a position where they start to what? Try to do some of the right things, and we can encourage the heck out of them. If you want to start feeling better, you literally have to start trying to do some of this stuff. Not that any of us do it perfectly. Not that any of us do it perfectly. And then a corollary to this, guys, is keep a pen and paper on the nightstand. For some reason, I hear of people doing this more often than the other one. This is try to like write it down and get it out of your head. That doesn't work for me. If I get up and write it down, it's game over. I'm up. I'm going to go like chop wood, carry water at that point. All right. Find somebody to talk to you about your specific worry. Now again, this is in general, so if it's financial worries, find a financial consult. If it's a business issue, find somebody who's good at business. If it's a substance use issue, find somebody from this group. Find a coach. Find a therapist. You guys get that? Find somebody who is going to be able to answer your questions and help you figure out what's going on. Be careful to try to get this off the internet. I did an experiment. We did intervention training, I guess at this point it was 2 weeks ago, and we did a little experiment. I went on Google and I typed help for addiction. And you had to go like 6 or 7 pages deep to find anything other than a rehab. And the rehabs are not on there to give you objective information. You guys understand it? The rehab is on there. They might be the nicest people in the world, but they are there ultimately to put you in their bed, put your loved one in their bed. And that is not what you need in a situation like this. You're looking for like objective information. If the rest of healthcare ran things like addiction treatment did, could you imagine what it would be like? It'd be like, okay, Aiden has a high fever and he's coughing a little bit. Let me jump on the internet and find out what to do. 5-year-old cough. And then it's like the emergency room pops up and I call and they're like, send him in now, get him in here now, get him in here now, get him in here now, get him in, he's going to die. That's the experience. Now, I'm exaggerating, obviously, on the rehabbing, but that's the experience if you call one of these rehabs and you try to get objective information. You're going to have to dig. Go to my blog, recoverycartel.com. That's where you should send everybody. You should go there. All that information it's groups like this, but it's also stuff that I've written along the way. It's stuff that I've curated. There's a resource page that has like that. None of those are rehabs, guys. Those are all just curated information. Try to find places where you can know what you're dealing with. Hopefully you walk out of here tonight knowing what you're dealing with, but you get better idea. Anybody have any advice around consultants or thoughts? All right, this is well, sort of your point, Carolyn. Avoiding toxic people and toxic information. And again, if you're already stressed and you're at an 8, you may not need to be hearing from your friend who's just going to just be banging on people, and just real negative folks are tough to deal with when you're in this state of mind. And you probably know, and you have people, we all have people who are kind of grumpy in our lives, right? I mean, just sort of grumpy. Not like mean, but just grumpy, that kind of thing. We also know people that are just straight up the cup is half empty. You know, be careful on how much exposure you can have around, especially the cup half empty part. You guys already know that the situation is half empty, right? Be careful who you call for advice. If you go back to the consultant one, be careful you don't call like people who are going to give you knee-jerk advice and tell you things like, if that was my kid, he'd be out of the house. If that was my kid, he would never talk to me that way. That kind of thing. I tell you what, I can't stand that. There's only one thing worse than that. There's only one person worse than the person who says that. And that's the couple that never had kids. That wants to tell you how to raise your kids. And they send you pictures of their dogs at Christmas. I have some people out there that I love that do that. I love you. Don't get in. But, I mean, you don't want to hear that when you're in the middle of dealing with this stuff. Come to groups like this and talk to other people that are going through it. Talk to people that understand how to deal with the uncertainty. You need to get positive vibes coming in. Media we talked about. There's an app out that they're trying to create. They've launched it already, but one of the aspects would be that there's a thing called the Beautiful Web that only allows you access to positive news stories if you log in through that part of the process. It's used mainly for depression, but you can see how that would be important. Worry does not prevent bad outcomes. They did a study and they anonymously interviewed people, and one of the reasons it was cited that people worry is because they said, well, if I don't, I feel guilty. So, and we've all maybe done that, but let's think that through from a logical point of view. If that means you must think that the worry actually does something, right? Like if I relax too much about this, the bad thing's going to happen. And I know I've had that happen with me. You almost feel like if you let your guard down. But let's all be on the same page. There's no connection between the two. If you're having a good day, go with it. People have told me that they've realized that they didn't worry that day, and then they automatically started worrying as soon as they realized that they hadn't been worrying. It's okay to not worry. It is perfectly fine to not worry, and go with that. Prayer and meditation, we talked about this a little bit. So we can camp out here as long as we need to, because I feel like this is an important part of the conversation. And we all come from different backgrounds, and whatever that may be. And at FAVOR Greenville, we don't promote any certain pathway to recovery. But I will tell you, when you're dealing with something that you have no control over, I don't know that I can think of anything better to do than pray. This is just me and my opinion on this. And you'll hear people, there's a slogan you hear a lot that goes, if you pray, why worry? If you worry, why pray? And I think there's probably something to that, I guess. We also know that when you pray, you're engaging your mind in something other than the obsession about the issue. The way you implement that in your life is interesting. People do it a lot of different ways. I just have some recommendations or ideas around that. I really believe in a morning routine. I really believe if you're dealing with stress, that if you can get up in the morning and give yourself a little bit of time to pray, maybe read something uplifting, try to slow yourself down and set yourself up for a good day. You know what it's like whenever you are running late, you forget your keys, you're in and you're just late for the first meeting of the day, and you just set yourself up for, it's like dominoes from then on. That's whenever you're in the middle of a stress cycle, that's not a good way to try to start your day. Now we know that sometimes you can't sleep at night, so getting up early can't get it done. Maybe you do this in the evening. Maybe you do this sometime during the day. So we would call that kind of planned prayer. That's one recommendation. And then the other thing would be in the moment stuff. When I got into recovery, man, so I didn't know what was going on with me. I've shared this before. I had an alcohol use disorder way before I became addicted to opioids. I was in a car accident in 1999. At the time, I was doing very, very well in my career. I had a young family. Was rear-ended at a red light, and I got rushed to a hospital. This is in Western Pennsylvania, and I walked out of the emergency room with 120 Darvocet. So this is 99. This is right at the beginning of Purdue Pharma and a lot of these other companies pushing this idea of don't let people feel pain. And so that began like an 18-month journey for me. And I don't blame doctors for what happened to me. I will go on the record and tell you that. I don't even know if I blame the pharmaceutical companies. I think I do. I'm not sure. I don't blame for what happened to me. I blame for some of this stuff. But in my case, I was primed for that because I wasn't innocent when I walked in there. Do you guys get that? I do not want to paint a picture of oh, there's poor Rich. He walked in the door and walked out the other door addicted. That's not how it went down. And I even knew my way around pills a little bit. I instinctually knew if I took extras of these, I would get a different effect. And so that takes me out, man. That takes me just down this road. And it ends, and I'm in rehab, and I'm doing my thing, and I'm kind of getting better. And I come out, and I cannot quit thinking, not about pills, but about drinking. I literally can't not think. It's all day, every day. And I'm doing things like trying to avoid places where they serve it, and I'm doing things like trying to not watch commercials that are shown, because Why am I thinking about this all day? And then I got some advice about prayer. And I still know the prayer that I said 10,000 times. Dear God, please remove this thought from me right now. Dear God, please remove this thought from me right now. Dear God, please remove this thought from me right now. Dear God, please remove. I bet you I said it 10,000 times a day. And then all of a sudden, I went a day and I didn't think about drinking. All right? Now, however you interpret that, whatever works for you in terms of your faith belief system, I do believe that God can remove the obsession from people. But I'm telling you, what is 100% certain is I haven't had those types of thoughts since. I mean, I don't think that way anymore. I had to totally rewire my thinking. Now, if I can do that related to substances, you can do that related to worry and obsessing about what's going on with your loved one. Where is he right now? Is he okay? Is he going to be able to come over for his son's birthday? What's going to happen when his wife? What's going to happen when his boss finds out? You get all those things that go through your mind. You can literally stop and say, "Dear God, please remove this thought from me." You don't even have to come up with a new one. You can have that one. But we recommend something that's kind of quick, sort of to the point, and a little bit like a mantra that you can like repetitively say in your mind. And picture it like going round and round and round, and say it over and over and over and over and over and over again. It will not happen just by saying it once. You know, it isn't going to happen by saying it 12 times. But it's going to happen if you keep doing it. It is literally like a neurophysiological fact that you can rewire your thinking. You can. Any questions about that? I feel like this is an important part of the equation. Anybody have any comments on anything related to that they could share in their experience? Are you going to try it? Who's going to try it? You'll try it? Try it. Try it directly related to this obsessional worry. If you're not there and you're just, if it's not broke, don't fix it. If you're not having this type of thinking, that's okay. But if you are having this type of thinking, really, really work on developing your own key phrase that you're going to go to. And do it all day. Do it for, even commit to do it for 1 week. Do it every day for 7 days, every single time you identify that you're going there. And I almost guarantee you're going to feel better. You're going to find yourself worrying less about this issue. My whole entire adult life, thought about drinking. You get that? It was always on my mind. I never even knew it was an issue. I literally thought that's how everyone was. And I haven't had a fixed thought or obsession or anything that resembles that. I'll never drink again. Not because I'm special, just because it's non-issue in my life. Because of this process, I believe you can totally rewire your attitude and outlook toward that type of thing. I haven't been able to do it related to powdered donuts. But I've told you guys the powdered donut story. You walk in the kitchen, you don't eat it. You're like, oh, that's pretty cool. There's a powdered donut. All right. You walk out, the day goes on, you're getting tired, everything like that. You walk by, there's a powdered donut. Okay. You walk in the third time, and all of a sudden you grab, you just plow through that thing, and you walk out, and there's white powder on your nose. Which isn't good if you run a recovery center, right? It's just a donut, man. So it's not like everybody has it wired in every direction. I will tell you, though, it's interesting. I do think that there's a direct parallel between my thought, my irrational, out of left field thought about wanting to drink, and your potential, like I'm not assuming everybody here has it, but your irrational, obsessional worries. I see them as kind of like very, very similar. Because they're repetitive, they're very self-defeating. So maybe give it a shot. All right, we've shared this. Let's reinforce this. You can put this in your action plan when you leave tonight. Research has indicated that these 3 things, when done on a regular basis for 30 days consecutively, will reduce stress overall. One is find something to laugh at every day. I don't know, you can watch a funny movie. If you got people in your life that make you laugh, spend time with them. Get on YouTube and watch, something that just, watch videos of cats. Or whatever it is you're into. Or what?
Or my husband does the I love golden retrievers.
Is that, yeah, there's all kinds of things that you can find on there. I'm telling you, man, if you want, you could spend all night on YouTube just laughing.
Yeah.
I don't recommend that. You know, laugh, music, upbeat. You know, that's the recommended kind of like thing. Take you out of yourself a little bit, and then go outside. Those three things. If you do that every day, those are shown to be connected to reducing stress levels. Would anybody else share anything else they use in their life to deal with worry and stress before I touch on a couple other things? Anybody got anything that they want to share with the group?
Exercise,
So exercise for sure,
like taking a little walk.
taking a walk, endorphins, that kind of thing.
I know laughter helps.
Laughter is
Helps me.
a big one, yeah. Laughter. What else? Dory?
Turn all the technology off 30 minutes before you go to sleep.
So that's something I don't. Why'd you have to say that, Dory? So my wife just talks about that all the time. And one of the problems with being connected all the time is you're connected all the time, and you feel like you can always do another email or you can always respond to another request, that kind of thing. But yeah, there's a lot of information. Put it away. Yes.
I volunteer a lot.
So volunteering, getting out of yourself, understanding that even in the midst of a crisis, you can give back. I agree, 100%. What else? Anyone else have any suggestions? Other things that we'll talk about a couple of this stuff. Let me get it through. All right, hold on. So a couple other things would be, you can work on kind of identifying your thinking. You can work on identifying patterns in your thinking, and I might have some of this in these notes, with a therapist or with a coach or with a trusted friend. And many times where worry is concerned, you'll find that it's triggered by certain things, and there's sort of like a theme to it. And the idea would be to try to identify that, and first of all try to avoid those triggers as much as possible, but then reframe them as well. So you can get that done as well. Let me go through a couple other things. So we've talked about the positive psychology story. I've shared in here what that's all about. Have I shared with you guys the philosophy of positive psychology? I'm a trained observer of human behavior, and your blank stares indicate that we did not talk about this. So positive psychology started in 1993. If you look at the history of therapy, or you look at the history of helping people, literally the person who put it on the map, the person who invented the term psychotherapy, was Sigmund Freud. And there's a world-famous quote from Sigmund Freud that goes something like this: the goal of psychotherapy is to return you from neurotic hysteria to ordinary misery. The goal is to pull you out of neurotic hysteria and just get you to ordinary misery. Okay? So it was never about actually thriving. Now understand, this is a different era. Happiness was not emphasized back in the day. Just survival was, right? For better or for worse, it wasn't about how do I fulfill myself. It was about how do I eat, how do I live, that kind of thing. And then all the other therapies that follow behind the psychodynamic approach are all about the same thing. I want to identify what's wrong with you. I'm going to tell you what it is, and I'm going to give you a formula to get rid of it. And you're no longer going to kill yourself. You'll be okay. No, you're not going to be happy, but you'll be okay. Do you get that? It was like you got a broken leg. My job is to make sure that you can walk on it. I don't care to see you run on it. That was the analogy. And guys, that is the approach in therapy. There's literally a book called the DSM-5 that is the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. Okay? Which means, let me figure out what's wrong with you. And there's 400 plus in there. I guarantee I can find one that applies to all of us in here. But then I fix you. Well, so the founder of positive psychology is a man named Martin Seligman. Seligman was the president of the APA in 1993. So he's a very successful guy. He's still a professor at the University of Pennsylvania. He's a published author at this time. He has a very interesting lifestyle. He's able to pull his kids out of school. He homeschools his kids, and they travel around the country from academic institution to academic institution, sharing things, talking. It's just a kind of a cool lifestyle that anybody would be envious of. Plenty of money, that kind of thing. Basically, he's grumpy all the time. notoriously grumpy. Everybody in the family makes fun of him. He's grumpy. And he has this experience one day where he's outside, and one of his hobbies was weeding the garden. And as you can imagine, with anybody who's like an APA president, the weeds were put in a perfect pile. Okay? And his 5-year-old daughter is following behind him. And if you ever had a 5-year-old daughter, you know this too. What they're doing, they're throwing him up in the air, and it's coming down in her hair, and she's like, oh, it's pretty cool. And so he turns around and he scolds her, and he just like yells at her, and she starts crying. He feels like crap, and they eventually sort it out, and they're kind of like, okay, and she calms down, and then she says to him, Daddy, do you remember when you made me give up my blankie? And he says, yeah, I remember that. And she said, if I can give up my blankie, you can give up your grumpy. And that's exactly how so he's like, oh, you got to hear him tell the story. You're like, oh, whoa, how do I do that? This is how he thinks, right? This is how a psychologist thinks. Like, how do I do that? I want to do that. My daughter thinks I'm too grumpy. So he goes in and he has access to all this information, being the president of the APA, and he can only find 2 articles in all the databases and all the resources that have anything to do with happiness. He finds like 20,000 plus on how do you keep somebody from killing themselves. How do you help somebody who's depressed? You follow me? There's only 2 articles on happiness, and those articles really only say why happiness isn't that important. So he says, this is weird, man. We really, as psychologists, have a responsibility to help people thrive, not just survive. So he launches the discipline of positive psychology, and it starts with, he brings together all these luminaries. They get together in Mexico, they talk, they develop a plan of action. And the first thing they do is they start benchmarking things across the country, across the globe, on are there universal aspects of happiness. This is very important. Not like what does it mean to be happy in Greenville, South Carolina, but what does it mean in Greenville and what does it mean in Nepal, India, or Tokyo, Japan, or Siberia? Do you follow me? Like, what are the universal experiences that make people happy? And that's how they start to build this. They start to identify what's universal, and then they start to identify strategies that can help you get there. Does that make sense? I got involved in positive psychology about 7 years into recovery, so I'm almost 20 years into this. So about 13 years ago, I was just done with everything I had done to that point. I wasn't going to drink or anything like that, but it was just like meetings. No, I've heard this. Did therapy. When you become a therapist, they make you, get therapy. I've been to therapy. And I've heard of this thing called positive psychology. I was in Western PA. This is in Philly. I do the thing, get a positive psychology coach. I fall in love with it, then I go get a postgraduate certificate. So that's how I became involved in it. I believe that it can be incredibly useful I believe it can be incredibly useful for anyone. Most of this is delivered in the corporate environment. Most of these exercises are done with like highly stressed out salespeople. You think you guys are ready to lose it at any given time. Talk to somebody toward the end of the quarter when they're worried about whether or not they're going to hit their number. And you just bring them in a room and close the door and say, how's it going? And they start crying for an hour and a half. And you're like, well, that isn't going to work. So this is where we started this process. So here's the first thing to know. There's a formula for happiness, universally speaking. 50% of happiness is hereditary. There are different nationalities that are happier than others. There are different personality sets. You're born with half of your happiness level. And it's actually not called happiness, it's called subjective well-being. Because that's just how cool we are as psychologists. We just can't say happiness. So has anybody ever known anybody who was just happy? Just sort of like, I don't even know what she's happy about, man. Like, car broke down, dog left, husband ran off with the maid. She's just like happy. What is up? Anyone know anyone like that? And then we've all known people who aren't, and we've known people who are in the middle. Nationality-wise, it's interesting. They do studies. The grumpiest people on the planet are the Scottish. It's interesting, yeah. And so the happiest country on the planet are the Latin American countries, Costa Rica. And that has a lot to do with family. That has a lot to do with, they tend to live the way we used to in America, where communities sort of like stayed together. They tend to do that there. Now, 10% of your happiness is your circumstances overall. Now, this always gets very, very confusing. That means over a period of time, only about 10% of your happiness can be attributed to like financial conditions, health conditions. You guys get that? Like all that stuff. But when you're going through the circumstances, your happiness level is way, way lower. So if you have a loved one who's going through a health condition, it's going to affect you. But the deal is overall you'll have just as many times that the circumstances are good, that overall it only affects 10%. That's a confusing thing. People think that, oh, well, I'm going through this thing and with my kid and this should only affect me 10%. That's not what that means. It just means if you work on this overall, it's only going to affect this through the course of a prolonged period of time. Think about 12 months. Does that make sense? And 40%, this is the good stuff, guys. 40% of happiness is 100% voluntary control. 40% is a lot, guys. Do you understand the Prozac? Prozac made it to market based on about 1.3, 1.2% efficacy. There's nothing in the world that has 40% effectiveness. This is better than Prozac, guys. All right? Voluntary thoughts and actions. All the things we just talked about, those 10 things, affect 40% of your happiness level. Things like this acronym PERMA: pleasure, engagement, relationships, meaning, and attitude. Attitude is also could be around like another A that's frequently used as achievement. You got to have some wins in your life. But these areas, you got to do something fun. I know that's counterintuitive depending on what you're dealing with, but you got to do something fun, and not fun in like a task-oriented kind of way. Like I had to take the kids to a soccer game. Not fun, check the box. Like literally fun, like go to a movie, or go play miniature golf, or go skiing, or go whatever it is. Go have some fun. You got to have a little bit of fun in your life. Engagement is what do you do where you feel 100% absorbed in the activity and time flies by. People call that being in the zone or flow, a flow state. So for me, I'm very, very fortunate in this work. I cannot believe this group's over. I say this every time we do. Like an hour and a half goes by like this. And the cool thing is if you engage in something where you tap into your flow state or you get in the zone, you have a payoff after the activity too. You feel a high from it, a positive high. Relationships, that's obvious, right? Quality over quantity. There's two different types of people in the world. One, when they walk in the room, everybody's happy. Two, when they walk out of the room, everybody's happy. So spend more time with number one. People who lift you up. Meaning is a lot of the stuff I just talked about around, can you get in touch with your faith? Can you get in touch with this idea of a higher power? Can you get in touch that there's more out there than what you're dealing with? Attitude is you can choose your response to any given situation. Very difficult at times, but you literally can choose that. It's kind of like classic Stoic philosophy. If you think about that deal of like there's no person or event that can ruin my day. My response to that will ruin my day. That's what attitude's about. Marcus Aurelius, the Stoic Roman emperor philosopher, I never get his quote right, but it's something like, hey, I'm going to run into a bunch of a-holes today, and they're going to try to do stuff to me, and things are going to go wrong, but it's not going to bother me. It's not like you can't wait till everything lines up in the world to have a good day, because you'll probably be waiting for a while, right? And I can tell you when I got in touch with that, like, I'm sitting there, and I don't know, like, you guys know my story, my wife and I, 3 adult children, kind of like, go our separate ways for a little bit, get back together, have 4 more kids. I got 7 kids, same wife, that kind of thing. A lot of kids, man. And the older ones are theoretically off the payroll, but if any of you guys have adult children, you know what I mean by that.
Oh, yeah.
Emphasis on theoretical. And I would lay there, and something would be going on with one of them, and I would be like, I would literally be thinking as soon as we get this straightened out, whatever it was, school-related thing, this or that, health-related thing. Then this thing happens with my son this summer, and I just snap. And I realize that, like, if I wait until all my kids are good for me to be good. Now, I know I'm an extreme, example, but do you get the point? Or if I wait till everything's in mine at favor, and we get this new set of contracts lined up, and Well, you know what? When that's done, I guarantee the next thing is coming. So you got to find a way. You can't wait for life to be perfect in order for you to embrace and try to thrive. All right. So we're going to wrap it up for tonight. Listen, I need to make one announcement real quick. So next Monday, I will be here and we'll be doing two things. We'll be doing a group like this on positive psychology, but the first half of the group, probably at least half an hour, is going to be on, like, it's that time of the year when I talk about FAVOR strategic plan to our customers, to our participants. And we do a couple different things. I kind of tell you where we're at, like what we've gone through and kind of what our accomplishments have been and what our opportunities are, which are vast at this point. Different places. Well, we've opened up shop in Anderson, Spartanburg. We've been asked to come to Pickens, that kind of stuff. I talk about those opportunities, and then I want to offer you guys a chance to get me feedback. There'll be a process. We'll give you the contact. Because we do the best whenever we listen to people like you when it comes to other things that we should be doing. So, for example, this lecture that I do is a direct result of one of those listening sessions. So, things that you should be thinking about that have been thrown around by other family members. Should we have a breakout group from this group? In other words, should somebody who also facilitates family group go back in the back room so that we could have a smaller group and share differently? Whatever time we have left over, we will do positive psychology next week. Thank you very much for being here. And guys, just seriously, like, try to trust the process, man. I mean, I know what it's like to be sitting in those seats. I know what it's like to be hurting. You guys, I've shared with you, I've gone through it with my kids. I get it. There is no good answer, but understand we got your back. And come back here and keep checking this out. Keep talking and keep thinking through it. All right, so if we get a moment of silence for those still suffering with this disease and for the family members by this no choice of their own, followed by the serenity prayer. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things that I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. All right, I got these emergency cards up here if anybody needs to reach out. This is manned by a live recovery coach. Have a good evening. Go forth and save the world.